Climate change is here, and it's already affecting millions of lives. In fact, about 24 million people around the world were forced to migrate in 2021 because of natural disasters. So is there anywhere that's safe for the long term? The reality is that every corner of the world will be affected by climate change, but some countries will definitely be better off than others. What's going on, you guys? Welcome to my channel. I'm Aman Luthra, and today we will be talking about the best places to live around the world in the age of climate change. I already made a video about this topic about where to live in the United States, which you can check out in the top right corner. Spoiler alert though, the United States is not in this video. Not just because it gets hit by many natural disasters, but also because the US tends to take a capitalistic approach in situations like these, rather than a humane approach, which is not going to make the cut. For the countries that made the list, I picked them based on 4 factors. 1. Exposure to natural disasters. In other words, these countries have a geographic advantage over others that minimizes their exposure to natural events like hurricanes and wildfires. 2. Mitigation efforts. These countries have put in a lot of effort to decarbonize by using renewables, electric vehicles, and so on. 3. Adaptation efforts. These countries have also put in a lot of time into improving their resilience to unexpected natural events, or they at least have the resources to do so. And finally, how they responded to COVID-19. The pandemic is the closest thing that we have had to a crisis in recent times. So I think how these countries responded to COVID is a relatively good indicator of how well they would likely respond to a climate crisis. With that said, here are 5 countries that you might want to move to in the age of climate change. Holy crap, it is so sunny outside. Number 5. Denmark. One of the great things about being a Dane is that you don't end up facing many natural disasters. As I am making this video, Europe is actually experiencing one of the worst heat waves it ever has. And while the temperature has gone up in Denmark, it generally hasn't gone up as high as some other European countries like France and Spain. Denmark also has not experienced a lot of wildfires or hurricanes in the past, and its climate is relatively moderate because of the warm Gulf Stream, which gives it a big geographic advantage. Denmark is also leading the way in clean energy. Nearly 2/3 of energy generation here comes from renewable sources, and they have pledged to cut emissions to 70% of 1990 levels by 2030. That has become a legally binding target which the government will be taken accountable for. Finally, throughout 2020 and 2021, Denmark had one of the lowest rates of cases of COVID-19. Like most of Europe, they were very strict about lockdowns and regulations, and it prevented a lot of people from getting infected until restrictions were lifted and the Omicron variant became a massive problem. Overall, Denmark's response to COVID-19 was very effective in my opinion, and I'm sure they will be a great role model in the age of climate change. Number 4. Finland. This country is definitely colder than Denmark, and that's going to be important in the age of climate change. Generally, the more north you are located, or south if you're in the southern hemisphere, the lower your risk of being exposed to natural disasters, because less heat leads to fewer fires, storms, and so on. Because of its northern location, Finland is literally in a far better spot than the rest of Europe during current and future heat waves. It also does not have much of a history when it comes to wildfires because of its subarctic climate, and it's also not really exposed to hurricanes because it's far away from the Atlantic Ocean. Finland also has about 44% of its energy generated from renewables, which isn't necessarily the highest, but just like Denmark, they're also taking an aggressive approach to adapting more renewables in the coming years. By 2030, they have plans in place to drastically reduce emissions in agriculture, housing, and transportation. And by 2050, their goal is to reduce 80% of all emissions from 1990 levels. That won't be easy, but I love that they are taking the challenge. Finland also had a great response to COVID-19 just like Denmark. It had one of the lowest infection and death rates in Europe and around the world. As a bonus, if you love spending time in nature, Finland has nearly an endless supply of outdoor activities, especially during the long winters. Number 3, Sweden. Man, we just can't get out of Scandinavia, right? Well, Sweden is the most populated nation in Scandinavia, and for good reason. Its economy really took off in the 20th century, and now Sweden is the 4th richest nation in the world because of its great international relations and its trading practices. That will be essential during climate change because as global unrest grows, most countries will likely get involved in a lot of conflict. The war in Ukraine is probably just a glimpse of what will happen. But Sweden has not been involved in a single war since 1814. Another big advantage of living in Sweden is that you'll get some of the best healthcare you could ask for. In Sweden, the life expectancy is 83 years, which is among the highest in the world. That's also a huge advantage because climate change will allow for disease to be more widespread around the world. So having access to quality healthcare will literally be a lifesaver. To be fair, Sweden did not have the best response to COVID-19 compared to the other Nordic countries, largely because of the lack of mandates and little consensus of how to respond to it. On the other hand, Sweden is also a leader in renewable energy. About 54% of all the energy generated there comes from renewables, mostly from hydropower and biomass, and they have pledged to reach 100% by 2040. Just like Finland and Denmark, Sweden's northern location puts it at an ideal spot to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Number 2, New Zealand. We finally made it to another region of the world. What sets New Zealand apart from other countries is that its wealth is highly dependent on natural resources. In other words, New Zealand has to protect these resources in order to keep its economy functioning, and that leads to aggressive climate action here. Almost 84% of energy in New Zealand comes from renewables, and what's amazing is that they're able to do that with hardly any government subsidies. They have a reliable access to geothermal power, which is not very common around the world, and they also generate a lot of power from hydropower, wind, and solar. Another thing that literally sets New Zealand apart from the rest of the world is that it's an island nation, which is going to save New Zealand from a lot of mass migration that will happen because of climate change. In the coming decades, people are going to have to move to either higher altitudes or more likely than not away from the equator, since that is the warmest area of the planet and hence the most prone to natural disasters caused by climate change. New Zealand also had one of the best responses to COVID-19. Being an island nation is definitely an advantage, but they also had strict measures when the virus became a major problem, and they took the time to listen to scientists, adopt political transparency, and have a consensus strategy. That's exactly the kind of response we need against climate change as well. Now, one of the downsides of living in New Zealand is that it's not necessarily the safest from natural disasters. There's usually one tropical cyclone that hits North Island every year, and there have been some concerning cases of wildfires in the recent decade. But because it has a plentiful access to resources, New Zealand is in a great place to adapt to the worst effects of climate change. And I'm confident that New Zealand's government will take the right steps to do so, being that it's one of the least corrupt in the world. Before I tell you the number 1 country on the list, I do have some honorable mentions. Switzerland. You just can't beat the quality of life in this country. Switzerland's economy is very prosperous, has most of its energy generated from hydropower and nuclear, and it had a great response to COVID-19. Also, the Swiss Alps are gorgeous. Iceland. This country is almost entirely powered by hydropower and geothermal energy. And like New Zealand, Iceland is also an island country, which will save it from a lot of mass migration. Austria. In this country, there is a direct price on emitting carbon dioxide, which is usually externalized in other countries. Austria aims to have a 100% renewable electricity system by 2030, and it had a great response to COVID-19. Singapore. This country is not the safest from monsoons, but because of how technologically advanced it is, Singapore has aggressive plans in place to adapt to climate change and continue its investments into solar energy. And finally, number 1, Norway. This was honestly a pretty easy choice because there's not a single country on this planet that takes more aggressive climate action than Norway does. Nearly 98% of Norway's energy already comes from renewable sources, mostly hydropower. And almost 80% of all vehicles there are electric, which is way higher than anywhere else in the world. And if you walked around Norway, you would see a lot of climate-friendly infrastructure, from smart streetlights to bike lanes to great public transit and a lot more. Even though Norway's economy does rely heavily on oil and gas exports, it has arguably the biggest geographic advantage over any other nation on Earth. Its climate is kept relatively moderate by the Gulf Stream, which makes it a lot warmer and desirable to live than other Scandinavian countries with long winters. Norway hardly ever experiences a hurricane, has great fire control, and is relatively safe from heat waves. Norway also continues to commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the coming years, and with its vast forests and resources available, adaptation will not be a challenge for them. And like a lot of the other countries I mentioned, Norway also had an excellent response to COVID-19, resulting in minimal cases and deaths until Omicron became a threat. The rest of the world may not have the geographic advantage that Norway does, but it could definitely benefit if it took the same levels of climate action as Norway does. Also, the Scandinavian mountains in Norway are beautiful. They should be protected. And there you have it. Those are the best countries in the world to avoid climate change, at least in my opinion. Do you think that there's a country that I missed? What do you think is the best country to live in during climate change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, there are places that you can go to in the age of climate change. So don't feel hopeless about all the bad things that can happen. Focus on what you can control and take action. because nature can live without us, but we can't live without nature. If you found this video helpful, then please give it a like and subscribe down below. New videos are posted every Friday, either a topic about climate change like this one or a really fun outdoor adventure. So if that's something you're interested in, then ring the bell as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya!